Welcome one and all to the Rush Business Report for Tuesday, folks. Tuesday, the 18th of January 2022. We want to say thank you very much to those persons joining us internationally in the region and right here in Guyana. Big thank you very much for joining the program this evening. As usual, we like to talk about what is happening with your pockets. We like to follow the money here. We like to unpack the credible and valid information. Say where you're from, folks. Say where you're watching us from in the comment section as we start the program the right way, folks. Bringing you all of the financial news, the news that affects you. We're going to be following the money here on the Rush Business Report today. Of course, we have lots of things to cover this evening. We're going to be joined by 𝐿𝐶𝐸. Of course, always on the show, our resident economist. We're also going to be joined by former Minister of Housing and Ferguson to talk about that issue that we spoke about last week. That issue with the monies at the Ministry of Housing that is not yet accounted for. We're also going to be joined by Dr. Karen Cummins, MP, who is a former Minister of Health. And we're going to be talking about some of the revelations that we heard recently, up to today, in the news about the Ministry of Health and testing and how that affects you and what has happened with the money for testing, because we need those answers, folks. We have so many things to unpack. So right now, we're asking you to share the live stream. Share the live stream with your friends and your family on your Facebook pages. Let's go, folks. Let's follow the money. Great, folks. Thank you very much for staying with us here on the Rush Financial Report, our business report. We like to talk about what is happening with your pockets. And let me give a shout out to those persons who are joining us from all over the world. We want to say thank you very much for being a part of the program today. Where are you joining us from, folks? Where are you joining us from? The Barbados is in the house. Thank you very much. Wendy from Mackenzie, thank you for tuning in this evening. Share the live stream, Wendy. New York. Gerald, thank you very much for tuning in to the program this evening. All of you joining us from all over the world, all we ask of you is to share the live stream, folks. All we ask of you is to share the live stream as we talk about what is affecting your pockets. We follow the money and we bring to you the credible and valid information. It is Tuesday, the 18th, if my date is correct, and we are going to be coming to you this evening live from Georgetown, Guyana. How is the weather where you're from, where you're at right now? Maryland is in the house. Thank you very much for tuning in. Brooklyn, Atlanta, all the way over there. Thank you very much, ATL, for tuning in this evening and sharing the live stream. We're going to thank you in advance for sharing the live stream, of course, as we ask you to do. Burbies in the house, West Coast Burbies. Our folks up there, Dartmouth Essequibo, as we know what's in the news, folks, the people at Dartmouth Essequibo, they are protesting again for justice or in Boston. That businessman was shot a few months back by a police officer from Sherwin Peters. The name was released, and of course, the charges recommended was manslaughter, and that infuriated the people of Dartmouth Essequibo. And today they blocked the roads and they lit tires on the road because they are saying that this man should be charged with murder. Keeping our eyes on that story, of course. We'll talk about that more as you stay tuned to our programming. Sherry Duncan later on, we'll be talking about that. French Guiana is in the house. St. Kitts. Thank you very much for tuning in. All of you wonderful people who tune in and share the live stream. Watching from Trinidad and Tobago. Sharon, thank you very much for tuning in. Sophia is in the house. Brooklyn is in the house. Marcia, thank you very much for tuning in. All of you good people for tuning in and sharing the live stream. West Side. Lorian, West Side, thank you very much for tuning in. West Coast Barbies, again, all of our good folks up there, West Coast. which part of West Coast you're from. Let us know. Crane Village, they're saying. Crane Village. Thank you very much for tuning in and sharing the live stream this evening. New Jersey, all the way in Toronto. Desiree, thank you very much for tuning in, Desiree. Share the live stream, folks. Share as we get ready. You know what we like to do, folks? We like to discuss the credible and valid information. The Rush of Business is all about giving you the details that affect your pocket. We know that people are worried about what is happening in the banks, in their pockets, in their accounts, and that is what we follow here. That is what affects you most, you know. That is what affects you most, and that is what we want. We want to educate you. We want you to leave the program in the evenings saying, yes, I understand. Tonight we are going to be talking about more oil blocks. Right? When I bring in Elson, we're going to be discussing and we're going to break it down for you folks. Why these oil blocks should worry you. Why who they are awarded to should worry you. Because we are saddled with an administration, a regime that is bent on doing things behind the back door. They're even coming in the back door. They're behind the back door. They're outside in the yard making deals with people. And we need to know how that affects us. Good evening again to all of you good folks joining us. Loud and clear in Antigua. Our good friends in Antigua, of course, always tune into the show. Florida, from France, Connecticut. Thank you very much for tuning in. Belladrum, Maryland. See, all these names are going. Lusignan, thank you very much. West Side, you say you're getting us loud and clear. If you're getting us loud and clear, folks, we ask that you share the live stream as we get into our program this evening. North Carolina, where you? What part of North Carolina you're from? Raleigh, North Carolina. Let us know. Maryland is in the house. iFlot. I hope you're not living close to the University of iFlot. Thank you very much for tuning in this evening, folks. Let's jump right in. Don't let us waste any more time. I want to share with you one article before we bring in Elson Lowe. Of course, as I said, folks, we are going to be joined by former Minister of Health, Dr. Karen Cummins, who is also a member of Parliament and Shadow Minister of Health right now. We're also going to be joined later on in the program by Honorable Annette Ferguson, former Minister of Housing and Shadow Minister of Housing and Water. Right now, we're going to be talking about the money. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. Sit in. You will hear the numbers. I want to talk about this particular issue, though, folks. Right? Let me pull it up on the screen so you can see. 2020 Guyana bid rounds will open more acreage in prolific basin. Folks, we are going to be bidding off. We are going to be bidding. Companies are going to be bidding pretty soon for some more oil blocks. And how does this affect you? What does this mean for you, the average Guyanese? So help us discuss this and more as it relates to COVID and the economy. Welcome in Mr. Elson Lowe as we talk about what is happening with our oil money. Elson, good evening and welcome to the program. How are you doing this evening?
Hi, good evening. Always good to be on. Excited to chat about one of the areas that I'm quite passionate about, which is these oil blocks and what we do with them.
Yeah, I know that you've been on, doing a lot of research in terms of Guyana's oil wealth and, how we're dealing with it. But these oil blocks are a particular source of contention, I must say, because there's a lot of unanswered questions as it relates to the award of these bids for these oil blocks. Tell us how this works, Elson.
Yes, well, the old process is that the government would enter into a one-on-one negotiation with a particular company that had an interest in a block. And once that company met whatever it is that the government was looking for, they would apply and so on. And, they'd be able to get access to a block. And that's how several companies were able to get access to these blocks in the past. That process, however, has been criticized very extensively because, when you enter into these one-on-one negotiations, there's a lot of potential for two really negative things to happen. The first is that there's potential for corruption because they can look to bribe whoever it is that's making the decision. And the second is that it's difficult for you to know, and it's difficult for you really to get the best deal. Because if you just have one person that's looking to get access to something, you don't really have much leverage. Whereas if you have multiple people doing so, then you have all the leverage in the world. So as a result of all of that, that's a poor process that we saw, previously with the award of various blocks. Now we're looking to see whether there's going to be a bidding process. However, this is Guyana's last block in sort of the heart of things, which is Block C, right on the current team there, which has been described as the main area in terms of where the oil has been found thus far. So it's a really vital area. And as a result of being a really vital area, I don't think we can afford to mess it up. You got to get the best possible deal. One of the things I'd like to kind of lay a foundation here as we discuss this is to point out to your viewers this. When many of the blocks that have been explored thus far were first awarded, they were awarded either before we found oil or when we just had recent finds. It was very much a virgin territory and we didn't have any idea how much oil, or even if there was oil that was there, and we didn't have any idea of the quality of the oil. Those days are over. I believe Exxon has over 20 discoveries thus far. Other companies have been able to find oil in other blocks. So we must now approach this from the perspective of being a country that certainly has substantial oil reserves. And so, one of the things I like to say is, just ask yourself, what would Norway do in this circumstance? They would put, the most stringent controls in place to get the best possible deal, to have the best possible bidding process. And one of the things I think we really need to discuss is that there has not been an updated production sharing agreement, which is, the agreement that governs how much of the oil revenue we'll get, what the terms will be like, and so on. And we've seen a lot of criticism of the current production sharing agreement format, the current one. We've seen a lot of concern about loopholes and issues that it has in it. It is, to me, beyond belief that we would be auctioning off further oil blocks without an updated production sharing agreement, without having wide consultation on the production sharing agreement, without having expert review of the production sharing agreement that we're going to bring into the country now. So to me, this seems very premature and, astounding that after all of the cries by civil society, by the international community, by citizens, by the media, that there are issues with the current arrangements, we're going to be auctioning off blocks without having fixed those arrangements.
Yeah. I want to point out something that I found interesting as we talk about transparency and consultation. There was a paragraph in this same article which says that the Natural Resource Minister Vikram Bhatt told oil now one particular company has its eye on Block C. The company is willing to do 3D, right? 3D studies on the block for no cost to Guyana. I found this very interesting. I find it interesting because
there's always a cost. There's always a cost. There's always a cost.
Well, that's it. Right?
Yeah.
Seismic study, 3D seismic study. Sorry. To ascertain whether or not in terms of the oil resources. But what I find interesting is that you are going to be doing a public auction, so to speak, an open, transparent process. It seems as though this company already has a leg in the door. How does that sound to you? And who was the name of this company?
Well, I agree. This sounds to me like a bit of a continuation of the previous policy of negotiating with one company before entering into an agreement with them, as opposed to having an open system where different companies can bid. So it sounds a bit like a continuation of the previous policy, which, as I have said, has been criticized extensively. So it's very concerning. The other thing I would say is, again, let's just ask a simple question. What would the Norwegians do? They would not allow a company to do a 3D seismic on their behalf because they don't want to give up any of their leverage in negotiations. They want to know everything. They want all of the data. They want their own people to assess so that these companies now come in where the Norwegians are fully aware of the value of what it is that they're auctioning. They're fully informed by all of the data, and so they can make a good informed decision that will reach general public acclaim. That's the way that it should be done. This to me raises a couple of red flags. And of course, we don't want to be giving any of these companies any leverage in negotiations. The days of Guyana being this green frontier region where we don't really have a good sense of what's going on with oil and so on, those days are over, and we must now operate like we have something very valuable. We know what we're doing, and we intend to get the best out of what it is that we have. Because otherwise, we will continue to see public outrage, continue to see criticism of the management of oil and gas resources. And of course, we know that this stretches all the way back to the Dragon award to Exxon of 10 times the legal limit of blocks at the time, which again is, those things have drawn criticism for a prolonged period of time. So let's pretend for a moment that we're in Norway and try and operate along according to best practice. And best practice is for us to investigate what it is we have, so we know what it is we're selling, so to speak.
Well, as you said, nothing is for free. There are no free lunches, and it seems as though Vikram Bharat and Bharat Jagdeo, they're they're in this space where this company already said we can do this seismic study for y'all for free. I want to also, before we change gears in terms of this topic, because we have our minister to come in, we talk about COVID, and I hope that you will stick around also as we talk about COVID and the economy. As we saw a report coming out only today about Guyana on a list, and we're going to talk about that list. But before we go there, one other issue with this same article, where it says at the end of the article whether the Guyanese authorities prohibit current oil block holders, right, from being a part of the bidding process is another matter for discussion. The vice president said. He said whether or not they will be allowed. So there are a number of persons who already have oil blocks. Whether or not they will be prohibited, is an interesting question. Your thoughts on that as we wrap up this particular issue? We'll keep our eyes on this.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I wanted to say, just to close out that really seismic notion, is this. People behaving like we don't produce oil, man. We produce oil. We have oil money coming in. Let's do the seismic ourselves. I don't know why we need to rely on companies to be doing things for us. It's a strange psychology. But that aside, I think that in terms of having companies that are currently involved in Guyanese production or Guyanese exploration bid, there's upsides to these things and there's downsides to these things. In terms of deep water capacity, there's I think 3 or 4. You have Petrobras, you have I think Shell and Exxon that have experience in deep water. But I believe that Chevron and Anadarko, which I think is now part of Occidental, those companies have expressed interest as well. And so I think there'd be enough bidders if you wanted to have companies other than Exxon participate. What I think you don't want to see is small companies that don't have any experience in drilling, and some of them we have right here in the current situation, where one of the big controversies around the 𝐶𝐤𝐿 block was the level of experience and level of capacity that those particular companies had that were involved. And you might be aware that Exxon has taken over both of those blocks and is the operator. So Exxon is effectively doing the work in those areas, whereas those companies just kind of got access to the concession, and then Exxon farmed it in. So I don't think that we want, given the great controversy that practice has, and given that it may mean that we don't capture the full value for the country. We don't want that. We want established companies to be bidding. There's only one current really established current company, in terms of the length of their existence and the breadth of their activity, which is Exxon. So the question is whether or not we want Exxon to continue. However, for the smaller companies, I think it would create, again, great public outrage if those companies were to get access to that bidding process, because there's already considerable their capabilities. And it is not that they've been doing things on their own without Exxon. In fact, they've been relying on Exxon to actually carry out the works. So if they're relying on Exxon to carry out the works and they're there, one might ask the question, what's the point of having them there in the first place? Let's just deal directly with the big companies and make sure that we get the maximum amount of the profits. That to me is the best approach to take. So there's a question as to whether we want Exxon. Of course, maybe you don't want one company with such a large portion of your oil exploration and your oil revenues. That's a reasonable question to ask as well. And I know that now that we have the Brazilian president, involved in Guyana, he's going to be holding some talks here. I'm sure that he will advocate for Petrobras, which is the Brazilian oil company, to get
to be a part of that bidding.
Yes, I'm very confident of that, and perhaps these two things are related. This visit, but they are one of the few companies with that kind of experience. What I would say is this: I don't think that we should be awarding blocks anymore on the basis of national security, which is what was done before. I think we've got enough national security, if you catch me. Let's try and get some profits.
Definitely. Profits at the end of the day. And the renegotiation of a lot of procedures in terms of the awards. As you said, we have to put a lot of things in place before we go out awarding any more blocks. On that note, we'll leave that topic behind and switch our attention now to COVID and the economy, folks. I want to invite now the former Minister of Health, Dr. Karen Cummins, to this discussion as we talk COVID. Before we invite Dr. Cummins, so I want us to take a look at this article as we cast our minds on what is happening. What is happening, folks? And we need some answers to these questions, because I am aware that some sum of money, was allocated to the Ministry of Health for testing and COVID-related issues. We want answers, because today we saw the Minister of Health saying that only hospitalized and high-risk people, right, will be tested. And this raised some red flags to me, because is it that the government is trying to say to us, look, we're going to slow down testing, or we don't have the monies to continue testing these hundreds of people who are flocking these testing sites? What is the real issue? To help us unpack this, let us welcome former Minister of Health, Dr. Karen Cummins, who is, of course, an MP and Shadow Minister of Health. Doc, if you can, pull down your computer a little bit, you have a lot of headroom there, or just come up. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's good. Great. Right. Good evening, Doc. I want you to guide us through this discussion, because I know that there are number of line items in the budget that was directed to COVID-related issues, and a large sum of money to the Ministry of Health. Why do you think that this new policy or directive from the minister is in place, that they're going to pull back or scale back on testing, so to speak?
Good evening, Randy, and happy New Year to your viewers.
Yes,
I'm happy to be here. Randy, I have spoken at nausea of the PPPC mishandling of the COVID-19, the mismanagement, not having a comprehensive plan. I've spoken at length and in the parliament. And as you know, rightly so, COVID cuts across, race and religion and political affiliation. And if I'm to start off with a quote from the Director General of the World Health Organization, he says that this should be COVID-19. This pandemic should be an opportunity for for all of us, the government and civil society, to work together so that we can really grow and, of course, together end this pandemic.
Yes.
You have rightly said that the minister gave some words today, which is a little, I don't want to
Concerning.
say disingenuous, concerning, unimaginative, foolhardy. At best, it's really mind-boggling because here we are in the midst of a pandemic. It's a public health crisis, and how would you scale down in the midst of a crisis? You should be ramping up.
Yep. Yep.
And so,
Yep.
it allows me to think. But I think the minister, what he says, that the ministry is overwhelmed with the testing. And I think he's following the Ontario's model. In Canada, they're having something similar like that, where they try to scale back testing and, isolation rules and so forth. But what's sauce for the goose is not always sauce for the gander. I mean, we're now becoming an oil state and so forth. But if you have a plan, you work your plan. And so you just don't pick up from Ontario, Canada, and here and there, and just think that it's going to work for Guyana. Our epidemiological profile has shown that right now we haven't there's a surge.
Exactly.
We would have thought, like in last November coming on to December, it would have been a little dip, but then we know that the curfew was extended. There was a lot of change in the protocols, and so you had super spreader events, and so there's a surge again. I think it's very serious in that $3 billion, I think $861 million plus, and I think 74,000 or something like that, would have been added to the supplementary budget. That's just in December, and that's what I'm saying.
Because we are looking at the monies allocated to the ministry, and you should be able to provide testing for everybody that needs testing, because these are not play money. $3 billion in this supplementary budget to the ministry, which included COVID-19 related issues. Absolutely. So what are they doing with the money? Why is it that testing is not readily available for everybody? We were talking about testing for teachers, testing for frontline workers, and testing for students. How are we keeping people safe if we can't test them? And why is it that we can't spend our money in this direction?
Absolutely, because the health of the nation is really the wealth of the nation. And I mean, teachers and you're having reopening of schools without no proper plan. There's no testing before you enter the classroom, and both for teachers, and it's really sad. And then you had monies from donations, you're borrowing loans here and there. Indeed, as we alluded to $3 billion plus. Of course, that's drug and medical supplies, but it talks about reagents and so forth. And here we have a public health reference lab, which by now I think would have grown and maybe had to start doing research and testing for variants. So we're not testing for variants, and then we're not testing for COVID either.
Not testing. No, we scaling back for some reason in the middle of a surge.
In the middle of a surge, and so I'm wondering. I mean, and you see, when you have these kind of statements coming from the minister, you need to wonder what's happening, because now people are going to look at social media and go with their own interpretation. Is it that you're saying, okay, you're cutting down on the PCR test, but you're stepping up in the rapid antigen test, which is a 15-minute test, like a pregnancy test where you can do at home? Are you saying that, okay, now we're going to allow our frontline workers, our teachers, and so we're going to send the Ministry of Health now is going to send kits, test kits, whether, through the mail or how you're going to do it, and so each teacher will have 3 testing kits per week or whatever, to test. We're not hearing that from the minister. How are you going to do? Okay, you're caught him back here, but what are you doing in the midst? So you have a lot of guessing here. So your intention might be good, but you haven't let us know what's the next step. So that's why people are so misinformed and ill-informed and and disinformed. So are you saying that, okay, you're stepping back on the PCR test, all right, but then you're going to continue with the rapid acid, because people need to know. So I feel a little feverish, and so I'm not feeling any feverish now. I can go back to work. I mean, you have to do better than that. we need to know, people need to test when they're going back, because every person that has COVID, it's COVID positive, it exponentially got to multiply that by 3 times, And so I think Minister has to rethink what he's saying. And now in the midst of CDC saying that we're in the tier 4, I think the largest tier, the highest tier, of traveling, they're banning persons now, telling you try to do some other destination. Don't come to these 22 destinations where Guyana is part of. So here we're the high tier in terms of the scale of CDC, right? And you're scaling in the midst of a pandemic. There's a surge, and here you are scaling back tests. Of course, PCR tests is more sensitive, and even though that you may not having symptoms, but you still will test positive in some cases. Whereas the rapid test is just to say, well, okay, you have it or you don't have it, or like that. They have improved the rapid tests. Long ago you had some probably sensitivity and specificity issues, but now they have improved the tests, and so it can be used. But we need to get from the minister, okay, we are not doing PCR tests. We're just going to keep that for those who are hospitalized, high risk persons, those with comorbidities, those coming to the clinics and so forth. But then at large, as an oil-rich state now, we're gonna give out tests, so many tests for the teachers, so many tests, 3 tests per week, Sunday, Wednesday, whatever, Well, you have to hear something else more from the minister. But money is available.
I want to quickly push in this question before we bring back Elson and talk about that same, high risk level 4. The Guyana is now on that list, and the economic repercussions for that. But I want to ask you this question as a medical doctor. Do you believe that we are hastening to the point where COVID is going to be classified as endemic more than a pandemic? Because I believe, a lot of people are coming to the realization that we may have to figure out how to live with this, like how we would have figured out how to live with influenza or the common cold. Do the basic things, protect yourself, treat the symptoms, be careful. Your thoughts on when you think we as a society globally also may be able to move to that place where we understand that we have to live with this?
Well, of course, it's evolving, as you know, but at the same time, we the scientists think it's driven by the unvaccinated. So of course, there are 2 ways of getting it: either naturally you get COVID, or induced vaccination, getting the jab. And so for persons who know that you not have a good immune system, the jab might be easier for you to do. Of course, in addition to boosting your immunity through vitamin C, zinc, magnesium, and so forth, which you find in nuts and so on. But green leafy vegetables and so forth. But I think that it's a new normal. Studies are showing it's evolving. But we are, in terms of the policy level, we're supposed to continue with our active surveillance, our contact tracing, the testing. So you really can't scale back on the testing. It's not endemic yet, but it's still a pandemic. So you still have to continue with your testing. You still have to continue with the contact tracing. So when you test, you don't tell a person to go home and isolate. Right now, we have 12,000 persons in home isolation. You don't know the situation with persons at home, 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom, where they're living, and they have who they have among them, the vulnerable, the grandparents, the grandmother, So it's a little tricky, but we have to think it through. But it's doable. We can work together, put our heads together, and come up with something, that's reasonable. And so, to answer your question, I hope that it will become endemic, and we pass it through, come through us, which is like a usual occurrance rather than this pandemic, But we have to put some systems in place. We have to put some systems in place. All right. Whilst we're telling our populace with the 3 W's to wear your mask correctly. And of course, the N95 is let me put in a plug for the mask, the N95 or the K95 from the Chinese. That's the better one to use in terms of, close to your face without much exposure and air escaping. Also, the distancing, make sure you 6 feet distance as much as humanly possible. And you wash your hands and sanitize. There's some schools you don't have running water. And we got to make sure that we have these systems in place. The infrastructure, must be put in place for us to ensure that these things we can end this pandemic as soon as possible time. So the populace, they have a part to play. The Ministry of Health, they have a part to play in terms of contact treatment,
Seem
we call
to
it.
have had some
You know,
issue with my, forgive me there, I had some issue with my internet, but thank you very much for staying, keeping it going.
yes. So the treaties, so the policymakers, they have to work on the treaties of testing and contact tracing and treating, and I said before, the populace have to work on the three W's. But apart from that, we know that we vulnerable, our borders are porous, and so we have to make the necessary do the necessary things of tightening our borders, look at our enforcing the protocols. But more importantly, we shouldn't be scaled back our testing, and not necessarily
Right.
because Ontario would have done that. You need to do
Yeah.
Guyana.
All right, let's bring back in Elson. Elson, we saw Guyana there on that list of level 4 high risk countries. How does this affect us economically? Let's talk the numbers here in terms of how does this travel to Guyana, because we know there are a number of persons coming in, whether it be for work. I mean, mostly for work. How does this affect us in terms of the money?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd say there's two main ways. The first is through tourism, or the lack thereof, and how that will affect whether people will be willing to travel. And the second is business, people coming here, whether it's the oil industry or other industries. Because, of course, when you get that CDC recommendation that you're not to travel to a country, we're now at that level 4, the highest level there. Then a lot of businesses, corporate businesses,
Yeah.
will recommend that you not travel at all. I mean, they will have their standards, and they don't want to put their employees at risk, as much as
Yeah.
we seem to operate often in a very cavalier manner. Now that we're removing testing and so on, this is very cavalier by the PVP. So as a result of that, we will see some significant issues. What I would say is one of the really important questions is whether this will persist, this level 4, through to the Mashramani season, because that would
Yeah.
again really kill off our capacity to have tourism, but even our capacity to really hold those types of events that we hold very dear, those national celebration events. And so, it's very concerning that we've reached this level. It's very concerning that the pandemic has been allowed to escalate to this extent. And as a result of that, there's some real economic risks. One of the things that I think people will see, unfortunately, in the first half of the year, but perhaps throughout the year, is that this big surge in COVID, both internationally and locally, is going to cause inflation to continue to be very high. When you see people calling in sick, not being able to go to work, farmers not being able to plant because they're ill, you know,
Teachers.
yeah,
Yeah.
teachers and so on, what that does is that causes a restriction in the supply, because people aren't able to go to work to produce as much as they would normally produce. As a result of that, you see prices go up. And so it's not to say that there's no cost. Oh, we can just let Omicron go and infect as many people, and there's no problem. There is a cost. The cost is what you're paying with higher prices for food, higher prices for various other things in the economy, and the reduction in the standard of living. So these things are all connected. And so we've indeed seen a huge spikes of inflation internationally. I think in the US, the last number was in excess of 7%, which is a very high number for inflation. So we can anticipate a lot more of that, and we are only contributing to it by allowing Omicron to run across the country freely. That's what I
Yeah.
would say. And we've already had such a painful time when it comes to cost of living in this country. It is surprising that we would want to contribute, even further. We have, of course, discussed that one of the ways that this could be approached is through rolling, whether it's rolling lockdowns or rolling increases in restrictions, to manage the amount of people that are getting sick, while you put out some, whether it's cash grants or other relief, to help people to get through the fact that you're having to, businesses and so on, to get through the fact that you might have a few more restrictions in one month, a few less restrictions in another, based
Yeah.
on the surge. But that, of course, has not been the policy that's been practiced at all. So instead, we have, it's funny when you look at the numbers. If there are 12,000 people that we know have COVID, Omicron typically about 70% of people will have no symptoms. So
Yeah.
12,000 people, I'm not, by no means a medical doctor, but that comes out to about 40,000 people having COVID at this moment in Guyana, which is 1 in every 20 people. Right. So we're talking about some serious numbers here,
Yeah.
and it's not yet peaked. I think it's going to continue. So as a result of that, there's going to be a substantial impact to the labor force because a lot of people are ill. It feels like everybody knows somebody who
Who
is
got
who's ill.
COVID. And it's
Yeah.
affecting the economy. And I see, Elson, the TNCR would have put out a list of demands that they want to things to be included in the upcoming budget. We're going to talk about that on Friday. So let's keep that in mind. As we have about 50 more minutes to go, we want to switch the topic once again and bring in the former Minister of Housing, Miss Annette Ferguson, Honorable MP Annette Ferguson, to the conversation as we bring back this issue, Elson. We're also going to bring back Dr. Karen Cummins to the conversation because it's very important. Mr. Ferguson, welcome again to the program. I know that we started this discussion on the that can be accounted for at the Ministry of Housing. And we want to talk about that, and we're going to bring in former Minister Cummins also talk about parliamentary procedure and how do we get answers to these questions. But Mr. Ferguson, can you remind our viewers what exactly is happening there at Housing and why they should be concerned?
Well, Randy, first of all, a pleasant evening to you and to my fellow colleagues, Dr. Karen Cummins, MP, and also young Elson Lowe. But most importantly, a pleasant evening to your listeners and viewers. I'm indeed honored to be here again to share and also to indicate my concerns with regards to the funds that have been appropriated to the Ministry of Housing and Water. But if you would allow me to provide a brief background
Go
so
right
that
ahead. Go
our
right ahead.
viewership can have a fair understanding of where I'm going and the reasons for the questions or concerns being asked. Look, Budget 2021 was passed on March 4th, of which the Ministry of Housing received $6 billion initially. I think it might have been in just before um, just before the supplementary provisions in June of 2021. Um, Several contracts to the tune of $13.9 billion was approved on the or entered into on the 16th of March 2021, giving a total sum of $13.9 billion. However, I did ask questions as it relates to the shortfall, right, of the 7.9 billion. And this was the response given to me by the Honorable Colin Kroll. And here is answer. A combination of government subvention and the CHPA housing fund. Apart from that, you had 2.8 billion was appropriated through supplementary provisions in June of 2021, giving now a total of some 8.8, nearly $9 billion, for the ministry between the first half of the year. Again, in December of 2021, another supplementary paper just before the end of the year, a total sum of $7 billion was approved for the Ministry of Housing, more so the Central Housing Planning Authority. So for the year 2021 alone, the ministry would have received in excess of 16 billion Guyana dollars. Mind you, on March 16th, they signed contracts for $13.9 billion. Then on between the 21st or the 22nd of December 2021, they signed about 12 contracts to the tune of $13.3 billion. So you would have signed contracts to the tune of $27.2 billion in 2021 for the Ministry of Housing. Mind you, the total sums appropriated by the Parliament was 16 billion Guyana dollars. So we have in excess of 11.20, about close to $12 billion shortfall. I have piloted several questions to the minister because, first of all, I need to know how much money is currently in the housing fund. I have an idea how much we left as at 2nd of August 2020, right? And the minister will have to clarify, not only for me, but for the Guyanese populace, because this is taxpayers' monies we're talking about. How come government subventions or monies given to local organizations are now being used for capital works? That one I can't understand, but I'm currently doing my own little research to clarify whether you can use government subventions to do capital projects. And mind you, the monies that we would have approved, it's $16 billion that we would have approved for 2021. The explanations given by Honorable Colin Crowell was basically to do infrastructural development. So the lands that the coalition government would have allocated just before we left office, whether in Prospect, whether in experiment there in region number 5, whether on LBI, Annandale, and some of the areas here in region number 4. The explanations given by him is that these monies were going to be used to ensure that the roads and the lands are developed so that people can access the lands to start their construction. But I also have a concern, and a number of questions to this effect have been prepared and submitted to the National Assembly for the honorable member to respond. You're hearing about the construction of a 4-lane highway road by the Ministry of Housing. Since when housing is responsible for constructing highway 4-way lane roads? I thought that is a responsibility of the Ministry of Public Works, because anything highway, anything public is the responsibility of the Ministry of Public Works. That is why it's called Public Works. Housing, or the Central Housing and Planning Authority, yes, they will be responsible for constructing roads, but where? In housing communities, whether in Diamond, whether in Prospect, whether in Eccles, whether in Perseverance. That is their responsibility for maintaining and building community roads, or roads within the housing schemes, not highway. So I have also piloted a series of questions to get clarity whether housing is really responsible for constructing main access roads. So the $11.2 billion, we need to know where the shortfall came from. We really need to know. And I trust that when we meet as an assembly at the next sitting, the honorable member can provide us with clarity so that the Guyanese populace can know how their monies are being accounted for.
That is the important point. How are these monies accounted for? And on that note, as we I don't know where Guyanese can get answers from. The only place I know that they can get the answers from is from Parliament and the work that you guys as MPs do in Parliament. As we are on that, and we thank you very much for bringing that point up, MP Ferguson, because 11 point something billion dollars is not chump change.
No.
It's not chump change. This is a lot of money. There are school children at home who can't find a tablet or a computer to do work on because they're home due to the pandemic, and we can't account for 11 point something billion dollars.
Well, the minister will have to answer because, as I said, for 2020, you received 700 million as subvention. When clarity was asked to the minister for him to clarify what this money will be utilized for, he said it's paying salaries. Normally, Central Housing and Planning Authority is a semi-autonomous agency. It's an authority that generates its own income by sale of lands and all the other activities they do there at the Central Housing and Planning Authority. So, they generate their own funds to take care of their expenses, right? So 700 million was given in 2020. 1.254 billion was given in 2021 as a subvention. And the same, when I checked the appendix in the estimate, in the budget estimate, what it is catered for is for paying allowances and salaries. So we really need to know where all these monies are going, because you would recall just before us taking government in 2015, the Central Housing and Planning Authority was a cash cow. It was a cash cow ministry.
Yep.
And the audits will show, the audits will prove, the evidence is there to substantiate what I'm saying here. So, again, I will not let up. I will not give up. And I will forge ahead, because as representative of the people, we need to know how the people's money are being accounted for.
Yeah. MP Cummins, let me bring you in here. On that same note of accountability, what answers were given to you in terms of the provisions for this money, this 3 point something billion dollars in the supplementary budget that went to Ministry of Health? Because now I would want to know as a citizen, why is it that we can't get testing kits in every school?
Yes, Randy. Just following up on my colleague, Ms. Ferguson, MP. I mean, when you, for instance, that 3 billion that we're talking about, right? So you had 3 billion plus as current expenditure, and then you had a 3.8 billion again as what you're asking for supplementary, provision. And so what is happening too? Sometimes when they ask for this supplementary provision, it's already spent. So you definitely need to know, you want to know how it's being spent. And I hope the speaker, when you ask some of these questions, it will not be dropped off of the question paper.
Exactly.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sorry, because what normally happens, if I can pick up on a point that Karen raised earlier, Randy, and for your listeners and viewers. If a supplementary paper comes before us, remember, monies would have already been given by way of the budget. So let's say, for instance, the Ministry of Housing was given an initial sum of $6 billion. Then they now come in asking for a further $2.8 billion. As representatives of the taxpayers, we need to know how much percentage of the first $6 billion was actually spent, and where were these money spent? How much remain, and what that balance will take care of? When you pose these questions, you're being shut down by the speaker. He would say to you, no, we're dealing with the figures before you, the supplementary figures, but you cannot ask questions on a voted provision. And, for budget 2022, we will not allow this. We must get our answers to the questions, because at the end of the day, we have an equal responsibility to the people who we represent in the National Assembly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I hope that this year, I mean, I have a stubborn optimism, Randy, that this is going to be a year of good governance.
Yep.
And I hope we have, we talk about accountability and we talk about transparency. So I hope wouldn't be just rhetoric. So I hope
Yeah.
that this year we're able to scrutinize, because sometimes it's difficult to scrutinize. So I'm wondering, these test kits is allowing the minister to alleviate stress and pressure, on his ministry, and avoiding scrutiny. But we need to protect your people, the population we would say you're caring and you have compassion for, and in these areas. So we have to do better than that.
Yeah. And let me bring Elson in here. Elson, how concerning is this? Now I have two members of parliament who obviously are trying to get answers from the ministers of the respective ministries on specifically how these monies are being spent, and they can't get it at the level of parliament. How concerning for the average citizen is this? I should be able to know as a citizen how much money was allocated towards to test kits, for example.
Randy, if I had $1 for every time I've heard the words "monies are not accounted for," I'd be a millionaire many times over. Because it seems that this is something that happens all the time on the PVP. They are always these questions that are lingering, and you don't get answers in the end. We are still waiting for the audit of the COVID-19 cash grant.
Mhm.
Yep. Yep.
We're still waiting for that audit, and that was $1.5 billion that was not accounted for. So now
And the
we're
flood and the
The
flood
flood relief.
relief. Yeah.
the allegations around the flood
Mhm.
relief. That
Mhm.
where is that audit? Still waiting. Now we're seeing two other issues where we're waiting, and we don't know whether we'll get any kind of an answer. And in Parliament, which is supposed to be the primary body scrutinizing these types of things, we're not getting answers. This is incredibly troubling, and it is a trend on the PvP that is going to continue. I sadly think will be the case. So again, as it concerns the public's funds, now that we're going to be spending oil monies, is this going to be the practice? Monies will always be unaccounted for. That is deeply concerning. The other thing I would say is, and this is regarding the testing and so on that we're dialing back. I am under the impression that the PvP came to Parliament on more than one occasion for supplemental budgets last year.
Mhm. Mhm.
What's the point of coming to Parliament all the time for supplemental funds? And then when you actually need to have funds and things in place to deal with a real emergency, you don't have it and you have to scale back.
Mhm.
It is giving citizens the impression that there are not enough tests available, number one, but also that we did not purchase or prepare for the coming surge. And so these things are incredibly concerning. They're coming to Parliament for money. Where is this money going? I can't tell you.
Mhm.
Very
You know,
interesting. Very
you
interesting.
know,
And on that note, I'll give the two MPs an opportunity to wrap up our program as we're close to program time. Mr.
uh,
Ferguson, and then of course Minister Cummings, former Minister Cummings. Go ahead.
thank you very much, Randy, for having me on your program once again. But I just want to say something very quickly. For last year alone, you had four financial papers were tabled in the National Assembly. And Elson asked a very important question: where are the monies going? But the answer that I would give to that is because of poor planning, because of poor assessment. That is why they got to be coming to the National Assembly so often or on a regular basis, seeking monies, whether through supplementary or whether through contingency funds. These are monies that they will dip their hands into the contingency funds, spend out, and then come to the National Assembly asking us to approve of these sums. And when you ask the hardcore questions, you're being muzzled by the speaker. Well, this is 2022, and Annette Ferguson ain't taking no muzzling because I'm there to represent 218,000 people who need answers for how their monies are being accounted for. Thank you very much,
Yes.
Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Dr. Cummings, we have 30 seconds.
Yes, health in Guyana is decentralized. And I'm just wondering, I mean, we started off sometimes with cluster spread and then we go to community spread. And if you don't have test kits in region 4 where the capital is, and of course the population, and we can say it's the epicenter, what's going to happen to the other areas? And bear in mind, these regions where the REOs and the regional health officers, they are warranting money to the Ministry of Health. So they don't have any of themselves sometimes to buy, like on a private way. Okay, I'll go to this pharmacy and buy some test strips. They warrant all these monies to the Ministry of Health, and so I'm appalled now to know what will happen to those regions, those other regions other than Region 4. So it's a lot of things to think about, and I hope that good sense will prevail, and that we will show compassion and caring to our populace. And I will continue to lobby for the 218,000 persons that we represent in the National Assembly. And I wish that the ministry will rethink and reverse his situation, his thought, and what he has decided to do.
Yeah, and there's another issue we'll discuss another time about persons who are told you stay on for 14 days and you could come back. Whether or not, no tests, no results required. Again, falling in line with this scaling back of testing thing. But we're going to talk about it another time. I'll give Elsa the penultimate word as we wrap up our program.
Thank you. So I think tonight what we've really highlighted, and it goes right across the things that we've discussed on this program. We've discussed the award of oil blocks and the upcoming award. We've discussed the health sector. We've discussed the housing sector. How can it be that across all of these sectors, there are concerns about the ways that monies are being used, about accountability, about transparency? How can this be? This is what we're facing on the PPP. It's a constant barrage of concerns about possible corruption, of concerns about monies that are not accounted for, of concerns of mismanagement. It is no coincidence that across such a wide range of issues, we see this happening. So I want citizens to keep that in mind, especially now that we're going to see the Natural Resources Fund Act operationalized and spending coming from the actual Natural Resources Fund monies. Of course, they can withdraw the entire amount and spend it if they so desire this year. So we have to be alert to that. But what is concerning is, as much as we're spending, we don't know where the money is going because of this poor accountability. So citizens need to continue to apply pressure over the course of the year so that as much as possible, we get the answers and we get some value from all the dollars that are being spent.
Right. Thank you very much, Elson, for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Karen Cummins, MP, Honorable. And thank you very much, Honorable Annette Ferguson, MP, for being a part of our program. The Rush Business Report, Tuesdays and Fridays. Always lovely to have you here contributing. Do enjoy the rest of your evening as we make way for Sherrod Duncan and in the ring. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. Good night. Bye-bye.
Right, folks. That was our program for this evening. We want to say thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for being a part of our program. We are going to make way for our friend Sherrod Duncan in the ring. Sorry for we are a little bit over time, but you know what happens sometimes. We will be back on Friday as we discuss your money matters. There was a comment just now from someone who said we should have some minutes for questions on Friday. We'll open the phone line so you can ask your questions. As I always say, folks, do let us work together. Let us work together for national development. We deserve better. We deserve better as a country. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. This is Randolph Critchlow saying goodbye. Stay safe.